Hey folks, it's Michael Johnson. Welcome to this week's Energy Sketch. Going to talk about a nice little concept here that I've gathered up from this book. Cool book, The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Gallwey. And he's written many books, several books about inner game related to sports and also the inner game of work and some really cool concepts here. So let's jump into it. He's talking about specifically around tennis and about making shots and learning and growing and getting better at the game of tennis, but it also applies to the game of life, the game of work. And so he talks about sort of splitting yourself into two kind of selves. There's the conscious self and the unconscious self. He calls it various things, self one and self two, or also the teller and the doer. And so imagine that you're here and you want to embark on a new adventure, or you want to make a shot in tennis, or you want to do something in your work, you want to do a new project, you want to do something. Typically, and this first sketch that I'll give you is a sort of typical negative pattern that happens between our two internal selves. So typically in this pattern, self one, the conscious self, the teller, will tell the unconscious self, will tell the doer what to do. Not only will we tell our unconscious self what we want, hey, hit that shot to the right hand part of the court, or execute on this project, but we will also tell how to do it. We will give commands, and this can be problematic. And so what happens is that our unconscious self, our doer self, goes off and does its thing. Unfortunately, our conscious self doesn't really trust our unconscious self either. So while we're doing this, conscious self is also interfering by giving other commands. And in the tennis arena, this could be things like, move your racket up, move your feet, move your left foot, giving detailed commands because we don't trust our unconscious self to really execute on this thing. So we're interfering, we're giving other commands, we're tightening up our face, we're tightening up other muscles that are completely useless for the shot that we're trying to make. And so the end result at the end is typically, well, disappointment maybe. We probably don't really make the shot in the end when we've got all this interference happening from our conscious self. And on top of that, at the end, the conscious self is right there to judge us, typically to beat us up. Oh, there you go again. You screwed up again. You missed the shot again. And the judgment and the recrimination builds up into this spiral of recrimination, which is really not helpful for anyone and sort of leads to a lack of trust between our conscious and our unconscious selves. And our unconscious selves are capable, we are fully capable of being dynamic and in the moment and responding as needed to all these minute little changes in angles of a tennis racket that are needed to get the ball where we want it to go or to get this project through and completed. So, really, our conscious self is completely screwing it up for our unconscious self. So, there's a new sketch here. Let's reset our sketch and talk about a positive circle here that we can create between our two selves. So again, unconscious self wants to go and make that tennis shot, wants to go and do that project. So just use your conscious self to ask your unconscious self to please hit the ball into this area or go and execute this project. And then while the unconscious self, the doer self, is off doing its thing, the conscious self should simply let it do its thing and trust that it is fully capable of executing on this thing. And there are other things that the conscious self should be doing there, particularly focusing and concentrating on various aspects, but that's a topic for another time. So the key here is that the conscious self lets the unconscious self just go out and execute the way that it knows how to, and the conscious self trusts the unconscious self to do that. And so here we are at the end of our execution. And instead of judging and beating up and blaming, we invite the conscious self in a non judgmental, unbiased way to observe what happened, to reflect on it, to assess, and together to give some feedback, some constructive feedback to the unconscious self, perhaps, and to learn and to grow together in a virtuous circle of growth that can lead to increased trust and increased capacities and increased capabilities for our unconscious self to learn and grow as we go. So, those are a few thoughts on this idea of the conscious self versus, well, not versus, along with the unconscious self, the teller along with the doer, the self one along with self two, and how we can repair the trust between those two parts of ourselves, repair the dynamic, and lead into a virtuous circle of growth together. So, even if you don't play tennis, know nothing about the game, it's a cool book. It's really fun. It applies to so many aspects of life, and I may read his other books on the inner game of work or others. And love to hear your thoughts in the comments, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time, Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, youtube.com/@energy sketch. See you later. Toodaloo.